Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video will be brief and will be focused on the page or the Valet of Cups. Some of you who follow me may realize that every time I go through cards, and I usually always hesitate or pause at the Valet of Cups and make a remark about the symbolism of the youth with either a bib or a cloth semi-draping the cup. And today I decided to try to get to the bottom of it as much as I possibly can with the resources that I have. And before I flip the camera, I wanted to comment on these two framed pieces of art on the wall, which I usually have visible in my videos where it's facing me. This one is from the Artisan Tarot group. It's the Fortitude card from the Dodal deck, and it was hand made, hand stenciled, created with a linotype, carved block by Krisztin. Oh gosh, I can't think of her last name, so I'll put it down below. Beautiful, and somehow I miraculously got print number 1, so I'm so graciously thankful to have this print. And the other one was a gift from my daughter of the Wade Coleman Smith Strength card. The Fortitude or the Strength card has special significance to me, which is why I happen to have two. Okay, I'll flip the camera and we will get right into our discussion on the Valet or the Page of Cups. So my first thought with the Page of Cups and the drape, the scarf or the bib or whatever that cloth is over the cup made me think of some kind of religious connotation. If we think of the suit of cups in the context of the late Middle Ages or early Renaissance, we might think of clergy, right? So we might have, the idea that maybe there was a religious reference to it. So my thought was to go to the earliest cards that I have copies of, and that would be some of the Visconti Sforza cards, or the Charles VI cards, or the Rosenwald or the Budapest. So I'm not sure that I have them in the exact order, but of when they were created, but give or take a couple years. So this one is put out by two separate publishing houses. This one, I believe, was the U.S. Game Systems Inc. facsimile deck of what I believe is the Madrone, or the Carriel, the Carriel deck, I think. And we have a youthful person who is holding the cup, which is really hard. Another cup is on the floor before him. So it's really, really hard to see the cup because it's like embellished in gold, as is the background. So it's a very difficult thing to see. You see it a little bit better in the Visconti deck put out by Lo Scarabeo a couple years ago. And we see a youth who is missing a stocking. And he's got some type of royal or regal emblem on his attire, and he's got a hat, but there is no cloth, and in fact the cup has a lid. So there goes that theory. I mean, if you go to the earliest source of the deck to see what the earliest symbolism was, we could get a sense if it was a religious thing. We could get a sense if it was, an altar boy or, a youth who's studying to become a priest, We would get those kind of clues, but I see nothing here. But okay, say, well, that's just one deck. Well, let's go to another. Now, I think this one is Mary Packard, and I'm not positive, but I think hers was the Pierpont Morgan. And again, we have a youth with elaborate gold, garb, Nothing on his head. He's holding a chalice or a cup that is closed. And again, he's got a bare leg. Now, the cliff that appears in some of the, and I think there's the Sforza decks actually, is because I believe the Sforza castle was at the precipice or near a cliff. And so that cliff often appeared in decks that were commissioned by this family. And I think traditionally when we see cliffs, especially in like with the Fool card, I think it's a nod, whether artisans knew it or not, to that. But at any rate, but so again, we don't see any cloth. We don't see any religious reference. Here the youth doesn't have a hat on. Now, an altar boy, if you're in a church, you wouldn't have a hat, but there's no indication that he's in a church. In fact, he's clearly outside. I mean, I commented on the cliff and there's rolling hills. Now, this deck, it was the Page of Cups from the Alessandro Sforza deck. And he's not so young. And we do see a cloth, but it's under the cup, which is interesting. He doesn't have a bare leg, but his legs have two different stockings on. And he's not so young. I think he has a beard. It looks like he has a beard. And I'm not sure about what's going on with his head. But for the first time, we see a cloth. Now, this is from the Brambilla, which would have been commissioned by the Visconti Sforza clan. And I think this one would be from like 1463. And again, we have a youth with a hat. Again, it's really hard to see the chalice or the cup, but it appears like he's holding it in his hand. There's nothing covering it. And there's nothing religious looking about it. He's got a hat on his head. He's possibly outside, although it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, it's a very elaborate background. Again, he's got a roll down sock, which I'd love to know what that's all about. And then this is another Visconti Sforza. This one put out by Meneghello. This was put out also by Il Meneghello, Marco Benedetti, Mary Packard, Lo Scarabeo, and U.S. Game Systems facsimile deck. So again, we have a youth, this time again without a hat, nothing on his head, but he's not holding it. I don't think he's holding a hat. I can't tell. I don't think it looks like there's something in front of his hand here, but I don't know. I don't think he's holding a hat. He certainly isn't holding a hat in the others. And he's holding the cup again with two different colored stockings or no stocking at all on this one leg. It's hard to tell. Now, okay, so now we go to the people's decks, right? So we have the Budapest, and which would have been concurrent with the oldest, decks from the Viscontis. This would have been one that was mass produced for the people. And there is absolutely no religious reference here. I mean, in fact, this guy kind of has a fool jibe to him, He's drinking something from the cup. He's got his worldly goods. Or he's carrying a satchel of something. He's got some type of baton. I mean, you could almost misidentify this guy as the Fool card. But here he is, the Valet of Cups. So far, my idea that, maybe it was a religious thing. If we're going to the source of medieval and Renaissance Italy to find the source of religious connotation for him, we're sadly mistaken, right? So now we go to the Minchiate. This one was put out recently by Marco Benedetti. And of course, with the Bolognese style, we have a female in the Valet position, but the Valet of Cups and coin had a feminine identification. So clearly, no religious connotation there. So I go to the French a little bit, to the Anonymous Tarot of Paris. And we have the back view, it looks like, the back view of the Valet. And he doesn't look like he's any kind of religious references. Now, the Tarot of Paris, I guess early 1600s. And again, with the Bolognese influence, we have a female. No reference to religion here. The Metelli, this one published by Shel David from East Tarot Group, again a woman. The Vieuville. And I put it in this sequence because I'm beginning to believe that it's before the Noble, based on this cup. Because again, we don't see any covering of the cup. And this gentleman does not look in the least bit religious, and there's no religious connotation here. And his stockings are the same color. Then we get to the Noble. And it's the first time in my collection of cards, my historic decks, that I see this. The covering of the chalice or the cup. And that he's not wearing a hat. I mean, in some of the other decks, he's not wearing a hat either, but he's not carrying a hat. And here we have a youth who appears to be holding a hat, wearing a wreath of flowers, and is covering a cup with his tunic. So what's this about? It's been perplexing me for years. And then with the Dodal, a little bit later, 17 teens, 17 something, early, before 1720. This is another deck by Shel David from East Tarot. Again, in the French traditions, it seems, we have a youth holding a hat with a wreath of flowers on his head, with part of his garment covering the cup. And doing sequentially, we have another Bolognese deck. This may have been the Minchiate by, this is the Minchiate by Benedetti. Again, a woman. The Dodi. Now at this point, because this is later, even though it's an Italian deck, at this point, the Italians could have been copying from the French, because when the French, get their hands on anything, they tend to make everything fashionable, right? So here we have, I think, an example of the Italians, even though they invented the game of tarot, taking on a French influence, taking on the French style, or being influenced by the French style of these cards. And we have a youth holding a cap with a wreath of flowers on his hair, and part of his garment, this time it looks like it's actually coming out of, it's in the cup. And then by the time we get to Atea, we have the draping of garment over the cup. And then with the Waite Coleman Smith deck, this one's the Restoration deck of 1909, there is no garment going over the cup. So I think this character for me remains an enigma. From what I can see with my collection of cards, it seems that it's, the draping of the cup seems to be a French thing, right? Even though it's not in the Anonymous Tarot of Paris, which is French, maybe this was in keeping with Italian influence still, right? Oh no, this is the Via Veil, excuse me. This one's the Anonymous Tarot of Paris. So these two, even though they're French, we don't see what seems to be the French convention of, or convention rather, of draping the chalice with cloth. So maybe these two are earlier than the Noble, because maybe they're still adhering to some type of Italian tradition. And as I said before, in all the Italian cards, it's either a woman, depending on the region, or there's no religion at all referenced here. I mean, I'm not picking up on it. And sometimes they have a hat, sometimes they don't, but they're never holding a hat. This guy may or may not be. It's hard to tell. He seems like there might be something in his hand, but it matches exactly the background fabric, so it's hard to tell. But in the others, he's either wearing his hat or he has no hat. Right? So it definitely is striking me now as a French convention. And we see it, as I said, we see it in the Noble, and this one is the Peterson Noble. So we see it in the Noble for the first time in my historic decks. We see it a second time in the Dodal, which is a little bit later, about 50 years later. And then there's a bunch of cards, decks that I'm not showing, all TDM, which have that convention. And then here we have Atea's, which continues the convention. He doesn't hold a hat in his hand, but so I don't think it's a really, and then this is the Italian Dodi, but it looks like they're mimicking the French. So it looks like it's a French thing, and not in a, going to the source of the Italian Renaissance and the Middle Ages. My assumption that it was probably a religious thing with altar boys or something, or young men studying for the clergy, doesn't seem to be what this is about, unless it is a religious thing that the French imposed upon it. Now, it's hard to pin down what religion the French were. Certainly they were Christian predominantly, but I don't know if in 1650, if they would have been Catholic or Protestant. And certainly if they were in a church, they would not be wearing a hat, which might explain why the hat is in their hand. And maybe, part of the duties of the altar boy, I don't know if it would have been to, present water in a chalice to the priest, maybe keeping it clean, and I don't think that the altar boy would ever hold the Eucharist. I don't know. It's possible. Would ever be holding the Eucharist to present it to the priest. I don't know. I was never an altar boy. But I'm just perplexed. I'm perplexed. So I guess the mystery will continue for me, but at least I have narrowed it down in my view that it's a French thing and not one that originated in Catholic Italy. Hope this was interesting for you. Until next time, friends, peace and stay well.